Welcome back, everybody. Today we're doing a deep dive into something that might sound a little on the dry side at first, but trust me, it's going to be anything but.
Yeah.
We're looking at Jesus's genealogy,
Uh-huh.
and our sources today are going to be excerpts from a Bible study curriculum and a really cool fictional case study
Okay.
about a guy named Sam,
All right.
who hired genealogists to trace his ancestry. And what we're going to uncover today is how these genealogies, both biblical and modern, this fictional one about Sam, give us insights into things like identity, lineage, and maybe even a little bit of family drama.
Oh, yeah. Speaking of drama, Sam's case is a great example of how genealogies aren't always just neutral lists of names. They can be influenced by social pressures, people's agendas, sometimes even just straight up fabrication.
So let's talk about Sam a little bit.
Okay, yeah.
So he gets these two very different versions of his family tree from two different genealogists. One of them seemed really, really thorough, but the other one had all kinds of inconsistencies. And it really makes you wonder how we can even approach these ancient genealogies, from thousands of years ago with any kind of critical but discerning eye.
Yeah, you've hit a really important point there. Inconsistencies in genealogical research are much more common than you might think. Sometimes it's just simple human error, misspellings, information that's missing, records that have been damaged. But sometimes, like in Sam's case, it points to something a lot deeper.
Okay. So then how do we, as people who are doing a deep dive into this, how do we navigate these inconsistencies, especially when you're dealing with these really old, ancient texts?
Well, I like to think of it like being a detective. We have to examine all the sources, we have to think about what their biases might be, and we look for other evidence that might back it up. And when we're talking about the Bible, understanding the historical and cultural context that it was written in is so important.
Yeah. Which brings us to the heart of our deep dive today. The two biblical genealogies of Jesus that we find in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke. And these weren't just some, random guys writing down some names.
No.
Matthew was a Jewish tax collector who became one of Jesus' disciples, and he was known for his really meticulous record keeping.
Yes, very much so.
And Luke, a Gentile physician and a companion of the Apostle Paul, he was also trained to observe and document information really accurately.
Exactly. Their backgrounds really lend a huge degree of credibility to what they wrote. Matthew was writing mostly for a Jewish audience, so he wanted to establish Jesus' Jewish credentials, his rightful place, in the line of Abraham.
Yeah, the father of the Jewish nation.
Yes.
And Luke, who's writing to a much wider audience of Gentiles, he takes us way back.
All the way.
All the way to Adam.
To Adam.
Connecting Jesus to all of humanity. It's a really bold statement linking Jesus not just to the Jewish people, but to everybody.
That's right. And that difference in the starting point is a huge key difference in their perspectives and what they were trying to do. But there's even more than that, There's variations in the names themselves.
Okay.
Some names are in one, but not the other.
Okay, wait. So some of the names in Matthew and Luke don't match up.
Exactly.
Now, this is where it gets interesting.
This is it.
Do you think that those discrepancies are significant, or could they be explained by just, different cultural practices for recording these things back then, or maybe even just like, scribal errors?
Right.
What are the implications if they are significant? What are the implications if they're not?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Right.
One theory is that Matthew traces Joseph's line,
Okay.
while Luke traces Mary's line. Traditionally, Jewish lineage is always traced through the father.
Right.
But Luke, writing to a Gentile audience, maybe he chose to highlight Mary's line, which would have been really unusual,
Yeah.
but not unheard of.
Okay. And here's something that really jumps out at me.
What's that?
The women
Yes.
that are included in the genealogies, not just any women. Women like Rahab, Ruth, and Mary. These women weren't just, randomly thrown into the genealogy.
Absolutely not. Their inclusion really challenges our assumptions about lineage and who's worthy and who's not.
Yeah.
It suggests that God's plan often works through people you don't expect, people on the margins, people who are often overlooked by society.
Rahab, a Canaanite prostitute,
Right.
who helped the Israelites conquer Jericho. Ruth, a Moabite widow, who showed such incredible loyalty
Yes.
and became the great-grandmother of King David.
Wow.
And Mary, the mother of Jesus, chosen by God for this extraordinary purpose. It's like they're weaving this tapestry of faith and courage and even, a little bit of scandal.
Oh, yeah.
Right into the very fabric of Jesus's family tree.
Their stories are so fascinating just on their own. But the fact that they're in the genealogy raises some really big questions. What were Matthew and Luke trying to say by putting them in there? Were they challenging the norms, the patriarchal norms of their time? Or maybe they were foreshadowing how inclusive Jesus' ministry would be?
These genealogies are a lot more than just a list of names.
So much more.
They're packed with theological and historical significance, and we're just getting started.
Yeah, it really is like we're putting together this super complicated puzzle.
Yeah.
And each name, each story, it adds another layer to understanding who Jesus was and what his mission was all about.
And speaking of puzzle pieces, we can't forget one of the biggest parts of Jesus' genealogy, his connection to King David.
Oh, you're so right. The Old Testament is just full of prophecies about a coming Messiah who would be descended from David.
Right.
And both Matthew and Luke really want to make it clear that Jesus fulfills those prophecies.
So we're not just talking about a family connection here.
Oh.
We're talking about a lineage that was ordained by God, like a royal seal of approval that says, yes, this is the promised Messiah. This is the King of Kings.
It's like the genealogies are all tied in with prophecy and history, and they all come together in Jesus as the fulfillment of God's plan.
Right.
It's not just genetics. It's about destiny.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing how these connections to his ancestors bring together history and prophecy and salvation.
It really is.
But then if we dig even deeper into those names, we find some really interesting parallels and foreshadowing.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about it.
We have Abraham, the father of faith.
Yes.
His unwavering trust in God really foreshadows Jesus' ultimate sacrifice.
Absolutely. And then you have David.
Yes.
The shepherd king, a man after God's own heart.
He was.
He's like a prefigure of Jesus, the good shepherd, who lays down his life for his sheep.
Yeah.
David being a king points to Jesus' ultimate authority as King of Kings.
And we can't forget Solomon.
Oh, brilliant.
Known for his wisdom. But even Solomon's wisdom just doesn't compare to the divine wisdom that we see in Jesus.
Right.
The Word of God made flesh.
Wow. Yeah.
And even figures like Zerubbabel, who brought the Israelites back from exile after the Babylonian captivity.
Yes.
He foreshadows Jesus as the one who sets us free from the ultimate exile.
That's right.
Sin and death.
Sin and death, exactly.
It's so fascinating how each ancestor, in their own way, points towards Jesus and his mission.
It really is. It's like they're all part of this huge story that reaches its climax in Jesus.
Right.
But it is really important to point out that these ancestors weren't perfect.
Oh, yeah. They were definitely human.
Oh, yeah.
Very flawed humans.
Abraham doubted.
Yeah.
David committed adultery. Solomon fell into idolatry.
Yeah.
All these flaws and failures remind us that Jesus didn't come from a line of superhumans.
Right.
He came from real people.
Yeah.
People who messed up, just like us.
And that's what makes it so powerful.
Right.
That God chose to work through their imperfections and make their stories part of his plan of redemption.
That raises a really big question for us, though.
What's that?
How does knowing about Jesus' ancestors, both the amazing parts and the messed up parts, how does that change how we understand his mission and his purpose?
Well, for me, it makes Jesus' story so much more relatable.
Yeah.
It reminds me that he knows what we struggle with, what we're tempted by, and how we fail. He doesn't come to us like some distant God.
Right.
He's someone who gets what it's like to be human.
You've hit on something super important there.
Yeah.
It's not just about tracing Jesus back to Abraham and David.
Right.
It's about what it means for us.
Okay.
If Jesus, the King of Kings, was willing to become one of us, how does that change how we live our lives?
That's a huge question.
It is.
It's a challenge and a calling and a real privilege to be part of this story of redemption.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But I'm curious, what about you, listener? Yeah.
What stands out to you about this connection to King David? How does it change how you see Jesus' authority and his purpose?
It is really fascinating to think about.
Yeah.
We often focus so much on Jesus as Savior, but this connection to David reminds us that he is also king.
Yes.
And his kingdom isn't just some spiritual idea. It affects the real world.
Right, so we're not just called to have this personal salvation.
No.
We're called to live as citizens of his kingdom.
Yes.
And show his values, justice, love, mercy.
In the world around us, exactly.
Yeah.
The genealogies are pointing to a kingdom that's here now, but also coming in the future.
Right.
We see his rule in our hearts now.
Yeah.
But we're also waiting for him to come back and set up his kingdom on earth for good.
It really is amazing how much we can learn from just looking at a list of names.
I know. It's like those names are keys that unlock all this history and theology and even personal meaning. We started this deep dive talking about a made-up story about a guy named Sam.
Right.
Then we explored all the little details of the genealogies in the Bible, and we saw how these family connections show us deep truths about who Jesus is and what his mission was all about.
We've seen how Jesus' family tree connects him back to Jewish history,
Yeah.
fulfilling those ancient prophecies about a Messiah who would be descended from Abraham and David.
But we've also seen how the genealogies point beyond just Jewish heritage,
Right.
linking Jesus to every single human being all the way back to the first one, Adam.
Exactly. It's a reminder that his story is our story.
Right.
And his mission includes everyone.
And it's not just about these big historical figures.
Wow.
We've seen how the women who are included,
Yes.
Rahab, Ruth, Mary,
Uh-huh.
they challenge what we think about family lines and who's worthy.
It's like these women who are often overlooked
Yeah.
or pushed to the side back then.
Right.
They become these signs pointing to how inclusive God's grace is and how radical Jesus' welcome is.
So we've traced Jesus' roots.
We have.
We've explored all the theological and historical meaning of his family line, and we've met some really cool people along the way.
We really have.
But where does all this leave us, listener? How does it all connect to our lives today?
What makes us appreciate just how complex and rich Jesus' story is
Yeah.
and how it's tied to our own stories. It makes us think about our place in this big story of creation, redemption, and hope.
What if we each made our own modern genealogy?
Yep.
Not just our biological family tree, but also our intellectual and spiritual influences. Who would be the key figures in our lineage? Who are the fathers and mothers of our faith and values and how we see the world?
Wow. That's really interesting to think about.
It is.
Think about the authors and teachers,
Yeah.
the mentors and friends and family who have shaped what you believe and what you're passionate about,
Yeah.
how you see the world. They're all part of your intellectual and spiritual heritage.
It's like we're all part of this living genealogy,
That's a great way to put it.
this chain of influence that stretches back through time.
Yes.
And it's still shaping who we are becoming.
And just like Jesus' genealogy shows us who he is and what his purpose was,
Yeah.
exploring our own lineage can help us see where we fit in and what we're called to do.
What a thought.
I know, right?
Our deep dive into Jesus's family tree has taken us on a journey through history, theology, and even our own personal journeys.
It has.
We hope you've learned something new,
Me too.
to feel inspired to keep exploring your own connections,
Yes,
both the ones in your family and the ones in your mind and spirit.
absolutely.
Thanks for joining us.